Now what we've discovered is that urchins don't grow at the same rate. And the larger urchins will push the smaller urchins out of the way. So what we're doing over here is sizing them. And if you look in here, you'll see they're all roughly about the same size. And in this case, they're about the size of a nickel in diameter. And as the larger ones will be moved into an area over here. And so we're separating these out. And these are anywhere from 9 months old to a year and a half. And then finally, our larger ones are put into this trough system here. This is a system that we've developed. And we have our water supply at this end and our drainage down here. And these are urchins that we've actually raised from egg. And this is an adult size.
So that's 4 years old, or?
This animal here is probably about 3 years old. And we hope this season will be the first time that we're going to be spawning our own brood stock. So we raised this from egg. Yeah. And hopefully we are going to create some tiny urchins out of it in the next month or two. These troughs are designed so that there's a collection tank. There's a collection trough here, so that all the feces and uneaten food and debris settles to the bottom. That little trough, that collection trough down there, is too small for the adult urchin to fit in. So the urchin will stay up here in the top of the trough where there's plenty of oxygen and food, and the anoxic water in the bottom and the detritus will collect there, and then it just flows down so that it drains right out through here. These animals here are anywhere from 6 to 9 months old. They're from last year, our last spawning season. And as you can see, they range in size. You've got some that are quite small. This animal here is 1/10 the weight of this guy right there. So it's something that we don't fully understand, but they grow at vastly different rates. What we're eventually looking to do is to reseed areas, either bays that have been closed off that at one point had urchins that have been fished out, or there may be lease sites where fishermen or aquaculturists can place urchins that can grow out. We know that they need to be at least the size of a dime, or they're highly predated on. Once they get above the size of a dime, particularly above the size of a nickel, they don't have very many natural predators. Their primary natural predator is the good old Homo sapien, human beings.
Now, why are you doing this?
We're doing this because the fishery initially commercially started in 1987 and reached a maximum in 1984, and since then has dropped precipitously, so that it's been overfished in most parts of the state. And so we're trying to figure out a way to create a sustainable fishery. A good portion of the state, particularly from Penobscot Bay west down towards the New Hampshire border, is virtually completely fished out. Right now, the best place for sea urchins in the state of Maine is the Cobscook Bay area and surrounding area. It's still a viable fishery here. How much longer will it last on its own? We don't know. And what our hope is that we will be able to help the fishery by providing seed to restock areas that have been overfished. We have got a site over in Federal Harbor where a good portion of these urchins will be placed.
They have not been put there yet.
We have put some there, small numbers already. We'll be adding some more to it this winter.
Is that the idea here, is to get as many fish as you can built up so that you can put them back into the wild?
Yes.
And are there other places in Maine that are doing what you're doing?
There are 2 other small hatcheries in the state, but they aren't as advanced as we are.
How do you make money? How does this survive?
Well, right now this is experimental. And what our plan is that this year we will start selling seed, and then eventually the hatchery will get paid for by the seed that is produced. Then there's the potential of once the urchins are harvested to actually process the urchins. At one point, the Peacock Cannery did process urchins, but they haven't for about the last decade. But if we were to once again get a large supply, that could occur right here at the cannery.
Is it possible to set it up so that it works similar to a salmon pen, where you can actually have them in one area? And what would that mean to that area? Would that be a problem?
Well, that would be an aquaculture application to a lease site. Just growing the urchins, in other words, purchasing seed and then growing them, much like a salmon. Salmon, same way. They have hatcheries where the juveniles are produced, and they grow them in a captive form. Yes, that's another alternative. That's more aquaculture or farming. And yes, that's one avenue for the source for selling seed.
Do you run the risk of having too many fish in one place, which might, because they have feces, that they leave the feces on the bottom and it becomes contaminated?
It's called loading, nutrient loading, and actually Mother Nature has a law, and it applies to larvae and larvae tanks, it applies to salmon, and it applies to any species. It's simply this: that you can only grow a certain number of species in a given area under given conditions. You try to cram in more, and you stress the product. And stress causes weakness, which causes sickness, and you run into difficulties. They won't grow. They might die, but they won't grow. I mean, there's the bottom line.
We would be looking to reseed areas which traditionally had urchins that have been overfished. Those urchins then would go in and be feeding on the natural kelp, dulse, and ulva. So I don't expect that there would be an influx of additional food such as you have with the salmon cages. So I don't think you'll see eutrophication, which you do see with the salmon pens.
So the means of fishing these, there are two ways of getting them that they're getting now?
There's dragging and there's diving.
There's dragging and diving. Now, according to the Journal of Science, they have said that, in a recent study, that in 50 years, less than 50 years, if we don't start doing something about the way we treat the oceans, that we may not have wild seafood anymore. There's a 30% decrease in species already, and they contribute a lot of it to pollution and even dragging. So what I'm asking is, by the means that we're doing it, I'm not saying the diving, but the means of dragging, is that going to be in the future? What can we expect with that?
Well, here in Cobscook Bay, you've got very high running tides. And so there's a good portion of the bay in which you can't dive but for a very short period of time. The Cobscook Bay also has a very high flushing rate. So unlike other areas, dragging may be able to survive a lot longer than it will. No one knows that answer. However, the dynamics of the bay are such that it does seem to tend to support dragging more than other areas.
What about, but what do you do about the groundfish that we've lost? I mean, how do we try to get those back, or we do just resolve ourselves to the fact that maybe we shouldn't have them and we should just do sea urchins and lobsters?
Well, something that's happening with other species, it's hard to pinpoint species by species and say what the answer is, but maybe it's an answer of regulating a given area. Because what's happening now with the sea scallop, nationwide anyway, is they're opening up places that have been closed for 10 or 12 years, and now they're dragging the scallops down there, talking about off New Bedford and things, the lighthouse area, where there are just tons of scallops. And they've come back because it's been a closed area for so long. Now, maybe in a sense, groundfish, of course, they probably have a migratory process, process where they move around. But there again, maybe certain areas can be, put off limits where maybe it'll allow the species to come back. It's worked with the scallops so far. And there's so many vast areas out there where they can, rotate these closure areas. They'll probably have a sustainable, scallop industry for quite a while. So probably of all the species,
So
I'd say
in
scallop.
50 years, will we be eating wild seafood?
I think that the majority of the seafood that will be consumed in 50 years that will in some part can be attributed to aquaculture. If you look at 400 to 500 years ago, if your protein source primarily came from wild game, you'd go out, you'd shoot a turkey, you'd shoot a deer. There was a transition from wild harvest to farming, so that now you eat pigs, you eat chickens, you have cows. The vast majority of our terrestrial-based meat protein comes from farmed animals. And you're going to see that transition in the seafood industry occur probably even at a faster, that transition occur even at a faster rate than it did terrestrially. There are some parts of the world, particularly Asia, where over 80% of their seafood now comes from farm-raised animals.